Hi, once again, it's Melissa Norris from James Beck. I'm back with Michael Hoeppner, founder of GK Training, and we are now hosting our third series of our four-part series around communication. This series is about knowing your communication style, as well as how to shift it, whether it's pursuant to who you're talking to, what you're delivering, the message, etc. Should you change it, should you not change it? So my first question for you, Michael, is one style of communication better than another?
Mm-hmm. And the answer unequivocally is no. In a little short segment like this, we don't have time to give every single person a personality test, but most folks listening to this have some sense of what Myers-Briggs is, or all these other tools people use to have these different categories or classifications of personality or communication style, HBDI, DISC assessment, Hogan, and these sorts of things. All those different styles, there's not one that is better or worse. The idea, of course, is to know what your dominant strengths are, and then also how to improve the parts that might be some gaps or some weaknesses. So how this relates to remote communication is that oftentimes people get too hung up actually on what their style is, and they know what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. But oftentimes when you're really thinking about connecting with another person, you end up using more of those various styles anyway. So in essence, you end up being a bigger version of yourself. The introverts might become more extroverted. The extroverts might become more introverted because they're really responding to the person they're talking to. If you think of a friend you have going through a crisis and you're going to try to cheer that friend up, you wouldn't just try one tactic. You wouldn't just be very quiet and calm, but really centered in your listening. If that didn't work, you would change that. So the idea is that because when we're remote, it's very tempting to feel like you're talking into an unresponsive screen. Your job is to not only be the best version of your personality style, but actually expand that as much as possible. So be an extroverted speaker and an introverted listener all at the same time. If that sounds like a high level of difficulty activity, it is, but that's the goal.
It's funny, I've always said to be successful in sales, you need to be a bit of a chameleon, right? Because you have to have a connectivity and a relationship with the person you're selling to or working with or partnering with. And there are different personality styles and types as you just suggested. And so at times you need to read your audience and you need to know how they're responding to your character traits and your communication style. So I guess you're kind of validating that thought.
Well, I'll give you a really fun task for everyone who's watching this. I challenge all you extroverts out there, when you're remote, to do an even better job listening, and all you introverts do an even better job communicating. So for the extroverts, your job when you're remote is make sure you never interrupt anyone, even a single time. Make sure that a person is done speaking for a full second before you start speaking. Introverts are better at that, trust me. All you introverts out there, when you get a chance to talk, because you have this screen as a barrier between you and your audience, your job is to use as much vocal presence as you possibly can, to use as much physical presence and gestural life as you possibly can, so your energy comes all the way through this medium. And that should really be the goal, be that good of a listener and that compelling a speaker at the same time.
I have to be honest, I'm really gonna have to practice that one, Michael. I'm a pretty huge extrovert, but I do need to work on it. There's no doubt about it. I recognize that. That leads me to the other question. Are extroverts better salespeople than introverts? Because you kind of innately think that's the case, but I don't know that it necessarily is.
No, not at all. Both bring a lot of talents and skills to the table. Instead, I like to suggest that people think about awareness and agility. It's two A words. So you can even make an A with your hands like that to remember this. And one hand stands for awareness and one hand stands for agility. So awareness and agility, being aware of your type, whatever that is, your dominant strengths, but then being agile enough to shift that a little bit. A lot of selling is listening, is drawing people out, is asking powerful questions. There's a lot of introverts who are much, much better at that than many extroverts. So we have an idea of what selling is, and oftentimes that idea is like sales, selling, energy. In fact, there's nothing further from the truth. At the same time, that doesn't mean there's not a place for energy and passion and enthusiasm, because if you exhibit those things, the person you're talking to is much more likely to get excited about those things too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Totally makes sense. You touched a bit on communication style in light of the fact that we're all working from home and working remotely, and you gave some insights there. Is there anything further you could share with us about how to make sure your communication style is developed and is utilized in its best way, given that we are not in person?
Yeah. Well, what I would say is that the first 30 to 60 seconds of the call really mattered. Take as many cues as you possibly can off the other person. Listen quickly. Do they talk fast? They probably are in a hurry. You can move through the call in an efficient manner. Are they more laconic in their speed? Then you can actually probably slow down a little bit. Do they tend to answer with some brightness in their voice? That probably means they want to have a bit of a social interaction. Is there real assertiveness to what they're saying? In which case, guess what? You can probably ask very provocative questions early because they won't be offended. They just want the call to be finished and completed as soon as possible. So take as many cues as you possibly can off the other person. Now, the reason that's so important is because we don't have that other person's living, breathing body in the room. And when we do, we take a whole bunch of very subtle cues off them without even knowing we're doing it. It's much harder on the phone than the video. So really tune into those first 30 to 60 seconds and see how much information you can learn from the person you're speaking to.
That's great advice. Thanks much, Michael.
It's my pleasure.